Okay, good morning to all that have joined so far, and good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are joining. My name is Joanna, and I'll be doing the opening and the closing address of this event. I feel really honored to be one of the hosts of this event, which is called Innovations in STEM Education During the Pandemic, and is funded by the University of Tübingen in Germany and Lancaster University in the UK. Can just someone confirm you're seeing my screen? Okay, cool. Yes. Thank you. Our creative editor, a biologist and illustrator, has depicted the topic of this event like this, and we are keen to hear from you how this illustration resonates or not with you, and how we can challenge or take to the next level the stereotypical image that has emerged over the past 12 to 13 months during the pandemic for education. For security reasons and to ensure a smooth management of the symposium, we've set up the event as a webinar rather than a meeting. This means that only the panelists can use their video and audio, and all attendees have joined with the settings turned off. To communicate with us, please use the Q&A button. When typing your question or comment, please start by typing who or what you are addressing. Attendees can see the questions or comments, and they can upvote and comment on those questions. Panelists and ourselves as organizers will do our best to reply to all your questions. You will also see, I have to enable this, starting, okay, this one, just bear with me 1 second, okay. You will also see that automated subtitles are enabled. If you find them distracting, you can hide them if you wish to do so. We are recording this event, and it is also being live streamed on Facebook. So, who is at this event? We filled the 100 seats available for this event in less than a month. And we are extremely excited and happy about the representation of countries and entities that have registered for the event. We have people joining from all over the world, from the 5 continents, and very different types of entities represented here, from governmental bodies to schools and universities, social enterprises, and research centers. But who are we? Who is Native Scientist, the main organizer of this event? We are a non-profit organization that connects scientists with school children to promote science literacy. Our work is aligned with the United Nations SDGs, and we broaden the horizons of ethnic minority and migrant children by connecting them with scientists and promoting science and language integrated learning. We count with a network of 2,000 scientists and reach over 1,000 children every year. With 8 years of experience in designing, implementing, and evaluating science educational outreach programs, I consider myself a science outreach practitioner. I would like to know who you are in more detail and your experience in moving to the digital medium because of the pandemic. I will now share a poll with you, and I would like to invite you to answer the questions of this poll that I'm about to launch. Panelists can also answer, and you can select your answer and then press the submit button once you're done. Of course, people seeing us from Facebook won't be able to vote, but I'll share quickly the results once we close the poll. Okay, we are 90% of the people voted. So I'll just give you another 10 seconds. Okay, I've closed the poll. I'm sorry if someone didn't have the time to submit all the answers. And you can have a quick look at the answers. So most of us are researchers with an interest in public engagement or science education. Quite a lot of people, but this varies a lot, belongs to an organization that already offered activities online, and now that only occasionally or didn't offer things online. And now from March onwards, more people are doing this regularly, which is quite expected. Okay, thank you very much. So you can now see my screen again, right? Cool. So now going over through the program, we have 4 keynote speakers, followed by 5 project presentations and a 50-minute roundtable. I will pass the stage to our first speaker with no further ado. Please check the abstract book for all the speakers, their bios, and the program. We will, for the sake of time, because the program is quite intense, I will not do an extensive presentation of the speaker. I will just pass over the stage to Louise now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can see the screen. Brilliant, thank you very much. So lovely to join you. So I'm going to talk about our research and the importance of equity and inclusion for science education. So as we all know, there's been an impact of the pandemic on education generally, not just on science. Educational injustices have always existed, but as we know, they've been exacerbated by the pandemic. Now, in the UK, I'd be interested to know if this is common elsewhere as well. There's a lot of talk about learning gap, learning loss. And this is often, whilst there's a core underlying issue there, I think it's also quite a deficit discourse. And drawing on the important work of people like Gloria Ladson-Billings, she argues that we can, rather than talking about gaps, we should be talking about debts from a social justice position, about what is owed by privileged society to those who are suffering oppression. So it's not only learning that I think we also need to think about in terms of the learning debt that's been exacerbated, but also the wider things that young people have suffered from the pandemic, more widely around community, well-being, agency, and so on. And I think that putting equity and social justice at the heart of how we reimagine science education is key. So just a little note on what do I mean personally by this terminology. I would say equality is often that idea of treating or teaching or engaging with everyone the same. Everyone gets the same offer. Equity, I see as giving differently according to need, so that those who need more or receive differently. And social justice is taking that one step further and trying to actively think about how we change the structures and practices that create and maintain inequalities. So I'll shift between equity and social justice in my talk, but that's broadly what I mean by those. So I'm going to try and put forward two ideas for how we could put equity and social justice at the heart of how we reimagine science education. The first is the idea that I'm going to talk about changing the field, by which I mean systems, practices and values, not trying to change young people. And the second idea is trying to enact what we call intentional equity. So in terms of the first idea, changing the field, not young people, I'm going to draw on the research we've been doing as part of our Aspires project. It's a Research Council funded 13-year longitudinal study that we've been tracking the same cohort of young people from age 10 up to 23. And this year they're around age 21, 22. It's a mixed method study. We've surveyed over 40,000 young people to date, and we've got in-depth longitudinal tracking with 50 young people and their parents over time. We've collected over 700 interviews. And as you can see, we've produced a lot of publications. And at the heart of this research, it's showing that the factors are complex and multiple. And it's not an issue that we just need to make science more fun or interesting. So our data suggests that actually a lot of young people do find science interesting, but this doesn't translate into them feeling that it's something that they can continue with. There's still a gap and a feeling that it's not for me. And we suggest that this isn't really going to be solved by approaches that just focus on trying to change the students. So trying to, for example, increase their aspirations, their knowledge or their motivation. We think the key is also lying in changing educational practices, systems and injustices that create and perpetuate the issues. If we only change the young people and not the system continues the same. We have to keep redoing those efforts. This is a graphic from our most recent Aspires report, reporting on the 10 to 19 data. And it's really just trying to, as I say, show that there are lots of factors that we found that impact what we've got at the centre there, young people's sense of themselves, their science identity and their aspirations and their likelihood of continuing with science. And it's all of these issues. It's not, and as you can see here, that educational factors and practices play a big part, the way we represent science. So for us, it's changing practices, systems and values that is key and not just the young people. And if you're interested, you can access the full report there. To sort of support these ideas, we took this research and said, well, what can we do about it in practice? And we've had a series of studies working with over 60 teachers from primary and secondary over the last 6 years to say, what would this mean for practice? And we've developed the science, what's called the science capital teaching approach. And that approach is fundamentally based on changing practice rather than young people to narrow that gap, to make it science more personally relevant, meaningful, and to support young people's science agency. We've done 2 trials which suggest that it's statistically and qualitatively supporting more diverse participation and engagement. And we've got a new primary handbook and resources coming out later this year. So that was the first idea, changing practices and systems. And the second idea is how we enact intentional equity. So often ideas of equity get pushed to the side. It's someone's special role. It's a separate thing that doesn't necessarily run through the heart of science engagement and science teaching and learning. And we're saying that a deliberate focus has to cut through everything. Equity has to be a core underpinning value. It has to be everyone's concern and not separated off in this separate area. So we've been trying to do this work with both teachers and out of school informal science learning practitioners as well. And on our informal project, we developed the idea of the equity compass that we've used with those practitioners on the project. And the compass is just a device of trying to say, well, how do you do this stuff? Here are 8 dimensions related to equity and social justice that you might want to think about in relation to your work. And it's a reflective tool. So it's asking, it has sets of questions related to each dimension. And the idea is that you can try and plot where you think your practice is, and nearer the middle, not so good. There's about reproducing inequalities, whereas if you're moving towards the outside of the compass, you're talking about transforming them. Yes. Moving to more participatory approaches. So rather than doing science to young people or for them, doing it with them and so on. So you can summarize, the compass has 8 dimensions. It's quite a lot to take in. They fall into these 4 main areas, but really it's about challenging the status quo, these parts underneath of the 8 dimensions, how we work with and value diverse learners, how we embed equity in our practice, and how we extend equity, how we keep moving forward and going further. For example, moving from short-term one-offs to longer-term practice. We've got a whole set of resources around this, little 2-minute animations, printed resources. These are the questions related to informal science learning practitioners. And you can see that it's questions to try and support reflective practice around this. And it can be applied to any area of practice. So our people we've worked with have applied it to individual moments in their particular programs or to at a wider policy level. So they've been using it in their practice informally and with teachers in schools. And just a couple of little quotes there, teachers saying, for example, I was surprised what a difference could be made by such a small thing. That was a primary teacher. Or our informal science learning practitioners saying, you know, my confidence and my knowledge has grown. The numbers of people we reach, how far we've reached them, changing institutional cultures, and so on. So it's about changing practice to produce increased and widened participation. So I think my 10 minutes is coming to an end. So just to conclude, for me, it's about the importance of intentionally foregrounding equity and social justice. And it's because not doing so is not neutral. The default position is if you don't place equity centrally, is you're reproducing inequalities. It's not a neutral position. Focusing on changing practice and not the young person. Small changes can make a difference, but they do need to be incorporated into standard practice, not just special one-offs. One-offs can have a place, but if we really want to make a change, it has to be embedded through. And as you'll see from both the examples I've given, it's very much about the mindset for us. It's about the values and principles that underpin practice, not the actual resources or activities per se. The effectiveness of the resources and activities will be determined by the mindset you apply to it. So equity is key to disrupting these entrenched injustices in science participation. And I think in doing this, we can support all students to achieve. If you want more information about our stuff, you can have the slides afterwards. There are some links there. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. And I have to confess, I'm a huge admirer of your work, and it's very inspiring and very structured and very meaningful as well. So thank you very much. I now pass over the stage to Jessica, our next speaker. Thank you. Just before starting with the next speaker, we don't have time for live Q&A. The program is really intense, but I strongly encourage you to place your comments or questions in the Q&A so that the panelists can answer directly to your questions through there. Thank you.
Okay, then, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk about offline STEM education for children. And thank you for the invitation. For the 10 minutes presentation, I would like to talk about the importance and quality criteria of STEM educational programs overall. And then I would like to refer to a specific example, the Hector Children's Academy program, because our research is related to that program or is happening within this setting. And my name is Jessica Golle and I'm from the University of Tübingen. So let's start. Overall, there are, well, different challenges in school related to STEM and STEM education. So on the one hand, teachers complain about the fact that there's no deep conceptual knowledge in the STEM fields. And from the research, we also know that over time, there is evidence for decreasing motivation in STEM subjects, especially for female students. So there are sex differences in these STEM competencies as well as motivations. And these things have to be addressed in educational programs in general, or in STEM educational programs in general. And I collected something that is very important for educational programs in general, for the effectiveness of educational programs in general. And this is high instructional quality. And instructional quality can be divided in 3 dimensions into classroom management, cognitive activation, and supportive climate. Classroom management is related to clear classroom rules and procedures. Cognitive activation refers to challenging tasks that fit to the prior knowledge of the students, and supportive climate is associated with a positive and constructive teacher feedback, as well as a positive approach to student errors and misconceptions. So these are from the literature, based on the empirical literature, these are the most important aspects for designing education programs in overall, and should be kept in mind when we talk about STEM education programs. And for all of my claims and bullet points on the slides, I also prepared a list of references and literature at the end of the slides, so that if you are interested in going into more detail in all of these aspects, you have the opportunity to read the articles. So, and something that is very important here is also to say that classroom management is positively associated with student achievement, and cognitive activation as well as supportive climate are positively associated with subject-related interest. So this is the brief overview, and I would like to go on to the specific program, or the specific example, the Hector Children's Academy program. This is an enrichment program for gifted primary school students, and although this is very specific, I believe that the characteristics as well as the components that are used for creating the STEM educational programs or courses can be also adapted and integrated into a regular curriculum, or can be an inspiration for creating your own teaching materials. So this is the idea why I show this example here. It's a statewide enrichment program. This means that here you can see the map of Baden-Württemberg. This is one of the German states, and the red dots indicates the different academy places. And the program is offered across the whole state. Main content is on STEM. There's a wide range of course formats, so from block courses, one-day courses, to courses that last 1 semester. And the groups of children are very small, or relatively small, compared to a regular classroom. And the instructors can be teachers or external experts, such as scientists, for instance. And something that is specific for the program is that there's a formative evaluation of the program from the Leibniz Institute in Frankfurt, as well as the University of Tübingen. So, and now I would like to show you some information about the, let's say, general course characteristics. So on the one hand, it's very important that, we try to develop courses and provide courses that show interdisciplinary and innovative contents, such as the understanding of science, computational thinking, or sustainability. But even more relevant for these courses or these teaching materials is that they have been developed in an evidence-based way and in a stepwise procedure. This means that there are several phases in which the courses and materials are developed, and we use RCTs, so randomized controlled field trials, to investigate the effectiveness of these courses. And very important for these courses are instructional quality, as I have mentioned earlier, but also content-specific design principles or core components. And at the end, when we have created specific teaching material, then there's also a scripted manual as well as an instructor training, because as a developer, it's necessary to be able to multiplicate the course for these different local sites, for these different academies in the whole state. And here you see an example for such, let's say, stepwise procedure. So we have a conceptualization phase dependent on the target group and its needs, as well as based on the literature and yeah, these aspects. Then there's a pilot phase, and here you can see efficacy, effectiveness, implementations. These are different steps in which we conduct these randomized controlled field trials to investigate the effectiveness of the different courses. And during these course developmental process, there's also an adaptation of the course concept depending on the feedback of course instructors as well as students. And now I would like to show you two examples of these courses. The first example is the course developed by Dr. Julia Schiefer, who's also attending the symposium today. So if you have specific questions related to that course, she could also respond to that questions. The course is called Little Researchers Who Work Like Scientists, and the goals are to enhance inquiry-based methodological competencies, epistemic beliefs, as well as science-related motivational variables on the student side. And the approach to do that is an inquiry-based learning approach in which the idea is that students should work like scientists themselves. So they should make the experiences that scientists normally have. And there are these specific core components or design principles. On the one hand, that there's a step-by-step opening of the inquiry process, which means that at the beginning, doing experiments or working like the researchers is very structured and guided. And then the degrees of freedom increase over time. Then the next aspect is that scientific work is done in line with the scientific inquiry circle. This means that from generating a research question, a hypothesis is derived, then an experiment needs to be built up or conducted, data has to be collected, etc. And very important here is that it's not only doing an experiment or observing how the teacher is doing an experiment, it's also about reflection and thinking. So this means that here, especially in this course, also contradicting results are presented, or students observe contradicting results and then discuss about these results. And this in a cooperative learning settings. And over all of the studies that we conducted with this course, we found that there are indeed positive effects on the target outcomes. There's more to moderate, and sex differences occurred favoring girls, although this was not the main aim of this course. Now I see that I'm already reached 10 minutes, so unfortunately I won't present the second course, but here there is a slide, you can have a look at it, Getting Fit for the Mathematical Olympiad. It's about math, and I would like to show you here also that I collected all of this literature suggestions so that you can have more in-depth information about the things that I was talking about. And maybe to sum it up, so there is a need for STEM educational programs, also for offline STEM educational programs. There are several characteristics that are very important that we can derive from the literature, such as high instructional quality, but also content-specific core components, design principles are relevant. And I presented some examples to you, and there's also literature if you like to be inspired by these examples for creating your own teaching materials. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Very important to learn from this experience with working with specialized target audiences, which is a very effective way also of reaching the different types of people in a meaningful way. So there are some questions in the Q&A that you can answer. I just wanted to point out that the panelists cannot make questions in the Q&A. They can only answer questions. So you may also have some questions coming from your other colleagues belonging to the panel through the chat rather than through the Q&A. So thank you very much. And we now pass on the stage to Eleni.
So, thank you, Joanna. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you all for being here this morning. My talk now is about online STEM education for children, but I would like to focus on what can we do to be able to learn successfully online, especially with younger children. So in the next 10 minutes, I can't, of course, go in depth in this issue, so I hope that this presentation will be a conversation starter for my argument, which is the need to reimagine learning and teaching beyond the pandemic era as well. So I would like to focus on the online part in this respect, but also what that means for STEM education. And these ideas, I don't think that they only apply to younger children, but they apply to learners of all ages as well. But there are some challenges, of course, with younger children that we need to take into account. So just going very quickly on the definition of STEM, of course, we all know that it's about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And oftentimes we also have the arts as in STEAM. So it is an integrated approach, but I do see many different operationalizations of what STEM might be, and that creates several challenges and tensions. So we have to keep that in mind as we go in more depth, I guess, about how we can be successful in teaching STEM in online hybrid modes as well. So I would like to argue that the pandemic should be seen as an opportunity as well. I mean, we've all experienced the bad things of the pandemic, but there are things that we can learn from and benefit from as well. At least in my country, we have been starting discussions of how we can re-envision formal education beyond the pandemic in a way that bridges technology and the online world with the physical world as well. So we have entered in a crisis mode for the past year because of the pandemic, and I think that this has forced us into practices that are probably not the ideal ones, and of course are not ones that have been where there has been that opportunity to reflect and be very thoughtful about what we do. But I think that it is the time for us to step back and reflect and see how we can change what we do in the months to come. At the same time, we have been hearing reports from science educators as well that indicate that beyond these challenges, there are opportunities, but they also point to things like, for example, that students with some other skills, for example, with higher computer literacy skills, seem to be more engaged and more capable or self-regulated in STEM topics online. So there are things that we need to take into account. Now, if we just look at the broader context of the pandemic first, and then I'll go into what I think are some key issues that we need to pay attention to for STEM learning. If we look at reports like the ones by UNICEF, where it's shown that over 1.6 billion children could not attend school this year, and that's about 91% of children around the world. So with this sudden immersion in online education was seen as perhaps the only way to continue. Discussions like this one today in the symposium are really imperative to begin, and more discussions and workshops and opportunities to really work together should occur. Now, we have reports from teachers and students. I think it's very important to hear all sides of the story. And we have reports about how systems are coping and systems are not coping. So I think that that's an important issue as well to look at. So for instance, a report with 63,000 participants in the US from last fall indicates that 61% of the students believe that they have learned new things on a daily basis. So that's promising. But at the same time, I mean, we see impact on other people and teachers, of course, as well. So, and we see various modes of interaction. So these are some examples, some data from the States, where it says that only 20% of the students and teachers had returned to school, and 33% were entirely online, and 47% followed a hybrid model. And this is what I wanted to stay on, more particularly the hybrid model of teaching, and what can we learn from these online experiences that we can carry with us in the next months. So a lot of teachers reported that students are less prepared to learn, so that indicates the need for us to be able to scaffold our students. At the same time, I think it's very important when teaching online to understand that each of the teachers may be isolated. So a lot of teachers report that their morale has decreased, and a lot of fatigue, both physical and mental fatigue, has increased. And they all point to the need to support teachers in this endeavor in order for them to be able to support their students remotely. I think that this systemic relationship is something that we haven't attended to as much. So it's very important for us to look at successful practices and understand how we can do that at different levels. So there's the micro and the meso level and the macro level of support that we need to attend to. But at the same time, I think it would be a mistake to think that once the pandemic is over, that we're not going to go back to online learning. I think the challenge for us is to see how to use this as a transformative experience. And that's a key point that I want to make, transformative experiences. So if we look at some pedagogical theories and instructional strategies for effective online STEM education, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the next slides. But I want to emphasize that these are not just for online education. I think they are for either mode of teaching. So looking at the two general theories that I think are very important. So we have the transactional theory, the transactional distance theory that talks about how learning changes once we're online, and that we need to attend to issues like pedagogical design, interaction and dialogue, and autonomy of students' learning. That those are always important issues, but they're more important in this context. And then we also need to look at, again, a theory and ideas that are there with us for many years now, but they're extremely more important now, that we need to look at how we can create communities of inquiry and communities of learning, where students are learning from each other as much as they're learning from their teachers. Now, if you go to STEM in particular, then we see that we've always had these issues of that STEM experiences need to be challenge-driven. They need to be, focused around authentic problems. They should include project and problem-based learning and inquiry approaches. So now, how do we do that online? We do need a different pedagogical design that places more emphasis on other aspects, such as critical thinking, like self-regulation of students. And also with younger students, we need to focus on playful learning experiences and move away from didactic frontal approaches to instruction. And in this context, it is really important to look at the teacher and how the teacher can actually support these experiences. So reports of successful practices online suggest that there is a need for this careful orchestration of activities. This was always required, but when we moved online, we quickly found out through our own practices and other people's practices that the teacher either has to change their practice really quickly, and oftentimes they don't know how, or they need a lot of support to be able to do that. But also that otherwise they would expect passive attendance from students. Some models that have been discussed in the literature include flipped classroom models that might be appropriate, easy breakout rooms on Zoom, which can provide time and space for groups to meet online, and then reconvening in the plenary to discuss what groups have been doing in different modes. Of course, access to resources is important. I think technology is important, but we shouldn't place technology above all. As we see, there are many different types of technologies and tools that can support learning in general, and specialized, more specific learning and projects in STEM and STEM education more particularly. But we do need to attend to the issues of scaffolding, scaffolding students, but also scaffolding teachers as they try to make sense of all these resources that they have in front of them and how to integrate them into their teaching, or how to change their teaching to be able to attend to issues like this. So just some examples of technologies that are out there that I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with, and also some examples of virtual environments that can be used for running experiments and simulations in science, which can also be combined with the virtual and the physical world. So there are activities that have hands-on kits as well that offer students the experiences that can bridge both worlds. So technology can be used in many different ways, and I think that we have to think outside the box. So it's not just for learning, subject-specific issues, but it can be used to create and maintain motivation and interest, foster critical thinking, develop scientific literacy skills, develop information science skills, and also develop values and attitudes for informed citizenship. And I think that's perhaps one of the most important outcomes of STEM education, trying to help our students become more informed citizens that will guide the rest of their lives, of course. So to conclude, there isn't space to discuss all these different aspects in depth, but there is considerable research that supports the effectiveness of using technological tools and strategies to promote learning in STEM and in other subjects as well. But in these cases, the pedagogies are really important. It is important to include or to transform our practices so that we have more questioning, more dialogue, interaction, and pick authentic topics that the students are interested in and find ways to support them in this aspect. We also, of course, need to amass and distribute more resources for independent and self-regulated learning. So we need to support those aspects of learning, especially moving online, because a lot of times those students are going to be on their own online trying to find support. We need to create the opportunities to develop such skills and understanding. We should transition to more collaborative learning away from lecture type instruction. And of course, that means that we need to look at how we assess learning and how we understand whether learning has been successful in this context. With this all, we need to focus on engaging tasks, focus on experiential learning that would actually engage people at all ages for a longer period of time and help them see the connection between what they're learning to their own lives. So for me, the key is the transformation of practice and a critical approach to practices and pedagogy. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and I hope to have the opportunity to discuss some of these issues with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Indeed, like the fact that we need to promote playful learning, so that's a very interesting concept. We move on to the next speaker, Suzanne.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you can all hear me and that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll just introduce myself very briefly. I'm the Irish delegate to the OECD project, The Future of Education and Skills, and I'm also the chair of the advisory group for that project. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the project, EDGE 2030 involves a wide range of stakeholders, including policymakers, academic researchers, school leaders, teachers, NGOs, social partners, and most importantly, students from more than 25 countries. Adopting a multi-stakeholder perspective, the project set out in 2015 to answer two key questions. What is it that students would need to know and understand in order to be able to engage with the world in 2030? And then the how questions around what is it that we need to do in terms of policy and practice to help them achieve that learning. As I said, we began working in 2015 and our work is ongoing. We have a range of publications which outline our progress towards answering these questions. And today, what I'm going to do is very quickly pull out some of the big ideas emerging from our learning to date. What's interesting is I note Elena spoke about need to explore ideas that apply beyond the pandemic era. We were speaking about a new normal back in 2015. So I'm going to share with you some of the ideas around that. We started with the acknowledgement that education has to prepare students for a rapidly changing world. If you look at educationalists broadly and their writings, there's a noticeable convergence on a number of themes: the unpredictability of the future, the potential impact of technological advances and artificial intelligence, global citizenship, sustainable development, and a number of other themes. Economic, societal, and environmental changes are happening really, really fast, and technologies are developing at a really fast pace. So one of the things we have noted in terms of a future-oriented education system is a shift towards an ecosystemic view of education, which recognizes the impact that changes in the wider world has to have on education systems. Future-oriented schools are connected into their communities so that broader stakeholder involvement and shared responsibility and decision-making enriches student learning. And this contrasts with the more traditional view of the school and education as a closed system, populated by professionals who made decisions themselves, and students simply listened to their teachers and learned, and their parents presented the responsibility for education to the school. We're talking about the future, but actually the future is now. Curriculum experiences students have to foster a range of competencies that go beyond what has been available traditionally. In the past, curriculum, for example, has focused on preparation for work. In the 20th century, on individual fulfillment. Now, people increasingly need social and environmental awareness. We're much more conscious of interdependence, as well as the ability to cooperate, negotiate, and find creative solutions to problems. Second big idea is captured here in our learning compass. And the learning compass is a metaphor for the kind of curriculum that needs to be in place so that students can navigate the world through what's really quite a complex and I suppose unfocused future for many of them. We speak here about a number of elements in curriculum. So future focused curricula are very competency focused, are foundational competencies, which includes the traditional literacies of literacy and numeracy, but also extends the notion of literacy to include digital literacy, data literacy, physical and mental health literacies, social and emotional literacies. So these are the kinds of conditions and core knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are necessary for further learning across a curriculum. The compass also includes a set of transformative competencies, and these are the ones that are necessary to help students to develop a sense of themselves in the world, ability to adapt to complexity and uncertainty, enable them to develop and to reflect on their own perspectives, on the perspectives of others. So creating new value, taking responsibility, reconciling tension, dilemmas, trade-offs, and contradictions are all examples of those kinds of competencies. And then the ability to develop a competency is itself something that has to be learned using a sequent process of anticipation, action, and reflection, what we call the AAR cycle. This isn't entirely new. The emphasis is really strong in our compass on this. Reflective practice is the ability to take a critical stance when deciding, choosing, and acting, stepping back from what you know or assumed and looking at a situation from new perspectives. Anticipation then, of course, mobilizes cognitive skills such as analytical or critical thinking to foresee what might be needed in the future or the consequences of an action that you might take today. We believe it is within the power of us all to change the future and to build a better world. And so the model proposes that through the AAR cycle, the competencies that enable us to engage incisively and sensitively and responsibly with the world can be developed. A thriving education involves preparing students for problem solving, cooperative learning, autonomy. It involves developing the ability to communicate effectively, promote well-being, integrate emerging knowledge, reject a utilitarian view of others. And we're really very familiar, all of us, with the DESECO competencies and the notions of what are the key skills, cross-curricular skills, which students need to acquire. Many of them have been mentioned by previous speakers. In our project, we emphasize that the development of a competency-focused approach to education doesn't dispense with disciplinary knowledge, as it's more broadly understood. And on the contrary, young people need knowledge that's acquired through more than rote learning and memorization. So formative assessment, active teaching and learning methodologies, interdisciplinary work, bringing the real world into the classroom are core ingredients for this goal of promoting better and deeper learning. And our previous speaker gave really good examples of that when speaking about online education, STEM education. The other big idea that I want to speak about, although it doesn't exhaust all the ideas we've explored in the Education 2030 project, is that future-ready students need to be able to exercise agency in their own education and in life itself. Agency for us lies in the power to frame a guiding purpose and to identify actions to achieve it. Enabling the development of student agency is central to engaging them. As a learning process, student agency and learning have a circular relationship. When students play an active role in deciding what and how they will learn, they tend to show greater motivation to learn and are more likely to be purposefully engaged and take ownership of the learning. To help students develop agency, teachers cannot only recognize the individuality of a student, they must also acknowledge the wider set of relationships, what Eleni referred as the communities of learning, the peers, families, the communities that influence learning. In the traditional teaching model, teachers are expected to deliver knowledge through instruction and evaluation. In a system that encourages and builds student agency, teachers and students become co-creators and co-learners. Co-construction of the teaching and learning process is emerging as a focus on student experience development. In the traditional education system, we've emphasized the acquisition of academic knowledge, and we're measuring student progress towards defined outcomes. Standardization of outcomes is a notable feature. The shift now is towards valuing not only the outcomes, but also the learning process and the learning experience. In addition to student performance and student achievements, students' learning experiences are being recognized in and of themselves as having an intrinsic value. The focus isn't only on academic performance now, but on holistic student well-being. Students learn, grow, and exercise their agency in social contexts. Learn based on reciprocal relationships with their peers, families, teachers, communities, all of whom interact with and guide students towards well-being. A student's capacity to exercise agency is influenced by his or her social and economic circumstances, and our project recognizes the shared responsibility to consider the whole child in his or her community. We know that we have to change the field, as Louise described it earlier, rather than the child. And equity has been at the heart of the work of the Education 2030 project since its inception. We've been exploring how we can ensure equity through curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment innovation, and we'll be publishing a report on equity later this year. Now, I'm really conscious of our time, so I'm just going to show you a very, very short video. There are lots of links here. You're welcome to connect them. This video is just less than 2 minutes to watch. I hope this will work, and it will give you an idea. No, it's not going to work for me, so let's skip it. The reference is there for you. I hope you will take a look at it and many of our other resources. Apologies for a whistle-stop tour through what is a significant project due to run for another 2 years. Please let me know if you have any questions, and do explore some of the links below on the screen here to learn a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Indeed, very important to look at the full picture, you know, and of course, STEM education is a piece of it. Yes, I would like to invite speakers to share relevant links in the chat to all the panelists, on all the attendees. You can do that if you want to. And now I pass over to Karina, co-organizer of this event, to introduce the SLAM session.
Thank you, Joanna. So we are now moving on to the next stage of the symposium, which is the SLAM session, which aims to showcase STEM education projects and organizations that what they do and how they dealt also with the pandemic. We have to say that these 5 projects that we are going to listen and know more about now, they were selected from a larger group of projects that applied to present. Obviously, we had very good projects, but we selected these 5 based on the relevance, the originality and creativity, and also the motivation. So we will start this SLAM session with Fredulsen, who will present the Fredulsen's podcast, which is an illustrated education project aimed at explaining scientific concepts in a simple and visual way through short animation videos. So Fredulsen, I invite you to share your screen. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Oh. Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fredulsen Melo. I am a PhD student, and today I'll be talking about how I use PowerPoint as a low-cost animation tool for teaching. Chances are you have the PowerPoint software right now in your computer. Well, after all, 85% of all computers use Microsoft Windows, which comes with PowerPoint pre-installed. Most people presenting so far probably use PowerPoint. You see, as of 2009, some 500 million people were using it, with some 6 million using, with some 6 million teachers using PowerPoint in the classroom. And the main reason is because PowerPoint is a familiar tool and it's easy to use. And because of it being widely used, most people presenting on a computer using the PowerPoint, the files can easily be transferred between computers, even if they have different operating system. And plus, because PowerPoint software comes with a computer or is bought in one-time purchase, the cost is very low, hence it being widely available. But you've probably all heard about death bar PowerPoints, right? I mean, there's long and boring presentations with a lot of text, but it doesn't need to be like that. We like visual things, right? I mean, things that can catch our attention, engage us, make us follow along, you know, like animations. So to get back to the question that may have popped into your mind when I first present the title of my talk, what kind of animations can we actually create in PowerPoint? Allow me to demonstrate. So it all starts with your standard scheme for school or work presentation. In this example is a simple scheme of enzymes and proteins involved in plant stress response. I made this illustration in PowerPoint for a paper we published recently in my lab. This is to illustrate the level of illustration you can actually make in PowerPoint. And then you add a few animation effects to drive a point. For example, this is a simple animation to break down the flatten the curve concept. This was made into a GIF. On the right is a print screen of the animation board. And then you add more animation effects and more slides to create a full-blown animation. This is a clip from an episode of my web animation series where I explain why viruses don't infect everything, but only the cells they have a match with. Here's a breakdown of the animation. We can talk about in the Q&A. This is a clip from another episode of my web animation series where I explain why and how scientists use electron microscopy to be able to see microorganisms such as viruses and some bacteria. Here is a mechanism with the electron beam hitting the sample and then the scattered electron being detected. And finally, this signals is rendered to an image using a computer. Here's the breakdown for Q&A. And in this episode, I talk about a mega tsunami that originated in my country some 79,000 years ago with waves up to 170 meters high. This is thought to have been due to the fall of a flank of our biggest volcano, the Fogo volcano. And here's the breakdown again, and the breakdown of the second part. But in PowerPoint, you're not limited to flat symmetrical illustrations and animations. You can also create 3D or 3D-like and freeform illustrations and animations. I think that with PowerPoint, we are more limited by our imagination than by the lack of features. So to conclude, PowerPoint is a low-cost tool already being used for teaching and is available in most computers. So most people using a computer have access to it. And the take-home message is that with a few tweaks in PowerPoint, we can make teaching and learning more fun and enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederickson. Very, very interesting animations that all teachers would like to have, I'm sure, for their classes.
Thank you.
So moving on to the second project, Lectures Without Borders. Eugenia will be presenting, and I think Joanna will be the one sharing the screen. So Lectures Without Borders aims to bring science to schools by organizing seminars from scientists when they travel, and Eugenia will tell us more about it.
Hi, can you hear me well? Perfect. So yes, my name is Eugenia and I work with Lectures Without Borders, which is an organization that connects traveling scientists with schools and universities worldwide. Our idea under non-COVID circumstances is that when a scientist travels, they tell us where they're going. We find a school in their destination and we coordinate a lecture on site, basically. But of course, because of COVID-19, most scientists didn't travel and millions of schools around the world were closed. So Lectures Without Borders turned most lectures into webinars and podcasts and organized several online events. One of these events, which is the one that I will be focusing on this in this presentation, is the EPSC, the Europlanet Science Congress. This is an event that is annually organized by the Europlanet Society, which is a consortium of planetary scientists in Europe. It started in 2006, and it is an annual event that gathers around 1,000 people every year. Of course, in 2020, the event that was planned in Granada in Spain had to be cancelled, and the EPSC 2020 was held online. That is when, along with the Europlanet Early Career Network and Scientix, that is a community for science education in Europe, we decided to open this scientific conference to school. I mean, we tried to find a point in which this, having to turn this conference into an online event, could be a potential good thing for schools. That's when we made a call for interest of schools. We advertised it a bit everywhere, and we had 114 schools registered, most of them from Europe, but some from other countries. And then we started putting together this program that you see on the right, that I will be a bit more, will go a bit more into detail. So what we did was, first we asked the speakers, all the speakers that registered for the EPSC 2020, to agree to make their talks available to the general public. Most of them said yes. So then we had to go and do a huge curation of the material. We created plain language summaries for the videos, and we published them in a Vimeo channel that we created specifically for the schools. So not all the talks were available for the schools, because we first made a curation to try to find those ones that were a bit more accessible for kids. In any case, there were talks that were not modified from the original version. So they were originally aimed for scientists. But we also recruited scientists that would be willing to give supporting talks, that these ones were actually adapted for kids. So we created 6 supporting talks that appear there in the right on different topics. And for each of them, we created links with the on-demand program that we had created online. And finally, we organized a Q&A meeting with all the teachers that had registered, and we sent them handbooks with information. And before each talk, we also sent them information about what they were going to attend and how it would happen. In total, we organized these 6 supporting talks with active participation of 43 schools. All the supporting talks were in our YouTube channel that were air-lived, but also they're recorded. And for each of them, we created links to a subset of the conference talks that were specifically linked to that particular supporting talk. In this way, we tried to create a coherence in the material and to make it easier for the kids to understand and for the teachers to use in the classroom. Overall, one of these supporting talks was called The Anatomy of a Scientific Talk, in which we specifically talked about why scientists present in conference, how they do it, how they're normally organized. And we had one speaker of the EPSC that was invited. The person that was invited was that of the talk that was watched the most times and voted by the schools as the clearest, in a way to kind of also integrate the feedback from the schools. Also, we had a Slack channel that was continuously available for the schools, and the questions were answered personally by scientists in the European Early Career Network, and the students also participated in an art contest that was inspired by the talks. The idea was to create a whole package for the kids to become a bit more engaged. And right now we are ready to do this again. We are doing it in the EPSC 2021, ideally, but also we have 2 other conferences that asked us to do similar things. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I remain available. And feel free to visit us in our website or Twitter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. I think it's very, very important because a lot of times in these scientific conferences, no one thinks about science communication or education, and it's really nice that we can join the 2 things together. Thank you so much for the presentation. So we will move on with another project, Lab in a Box. Rodrigo, and I'm not sure if Joana will also present, but I've seen Rodrigo. Lab in a Box is a project that implements a novel kit of scientific experiments in the classroom alongside teacher training. And Rodrigo, please feel free to let us know more about this project. I cannot hear Rodrigo. I don't know if...
You're muted, Rodrigo.
Yeah, you are muted.
I can do it now.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to control my screen, but I'm not able to control the screen.
Joanna, you are muted.
Sorry, who changed the slides? It wasn't me. I think I gave you control of the screen.
Who is changing the slides? It's
just need to place the mouse on top of the image, no?
I just click.
Nothing happens. Okay, do you want to share your screen then?
Okay. Let me see.
Let me stop mine.
Let's see. Can you see?
Mm-hmm. We can see your screen.
I think it's not. Let's see. Okay. So can you see the PowerPoint, the PDF?
Yes.
Okay. Just check. Sorry for this delay, but I wasn't expecting the...
Yes, we can try again if you want. Here with my, I will.
Yeah, because the click is not responding when I try to click it on when you share it, so I cannot.
Maybe we can just ask you to change the slide.
Yeah,
yeah, maybe it's easier. Yeah, so
yeah.
first time.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hi everyone. So it's a pleasure for us to be here, and me and Joanna will share this very short presentation. And so, Lab in a Box is an educational project from Instituto Gulbenkian Ciência in Portugal, and it's developed by me and Joanna. and we are scientists and science communicators at Gulbenkian Ciência, and also by our collaborators and partners. So our project's main aim is to encourage and normalize the practice of experimental science in schools in Portugal and in African Portuguese-speaking countries. And its current target audience is teachers and by extension students of roughly key stages 2 and 3, which is from 7 to 14-year-olds. So why such a project? Well, because one of our great challenge is that although science is a major driver of development and of a more conscious citizenship, children are not sufficiently encouraged to employ a scientific approach either to questioning or understanding the world around them. So, and unfortunately, despite this being such a powerful tool to encourage critical thinking, experimental science is not a regular practice in Portuguese classrooms. You can change the slide, please. So at the very core, we attempt to answer this challenge by investing in the development, production, and implementation in the classroom of an educational kit of scientific experiments that we call the Lab in a Box kit. You can change. So our kit is portable and modular, and it aims to solve the many challenges teachers face when it comes to implementing experimental science in the classroom. For this reason, it contains low cost, easily obtained common use materials, always in sufficient supply for several groups of students, and the experimental protocols are short, simple, appealing, and fully integrated in the school curriculum. So you can change, please. So, but the Lab in a Box it's much more than a kit. So in 2021, this is our pilot year, and for which we devised a very focused strategy comprising several fronts. So in addition to the kit and a strong investment in the development of experimental guides in co-creation with teachers, we also designed and implemented a series of accredited teacher training workshops, which are spread over time during the school year, to begin training a group of pioneer that we call the pioneer teachers to use the kit in the classroom. We also provide them with online resources on our website and ensure a continued supervision and also support and sharing of experience through online forums and social networks throughout the whole year. You can change.
And since Lab in a Box is a hands-on project where social interaction is essential for our learning, this COVID-19 pandemic definitely threw a monkey wrench into our gears. But it simultaneously fostered that creativity and made us consider alternative ways of implementation. It forced us to move the teacher training workshops online. And this meant that in order to provide teachers with hands-on training during our pilot year, we had to make each session's materials available for pickup at the Gulbenkian Institute or have the materials delivered to the teachers' homes, which we did by mail. Next slide, please. And Lab in a Box teacher training workshops always involve the practical demonstration of an experimental activity. So during confinement, this means that Rodrigo and I conduct the experiment live from our improvised Lab in a Box studio at the Gulbenkian Institute, while the teachers simultaneously perform the same experiment at home using the material that they pick up or that we send them. The monthly online sessions allow us to keep in very close contact with the teachers and to adapt with them in real time to the difficulties of implementing these activities in the classroom, especially during this absolutely chaotic year. Next slide, please. We created dedicated WhatsApp groups for teachers, which we use to communicate with them in real time. Teachers send their doubts and share their concerns. We provide supervision and encouragement, and we're able to foster the group spirit even from a distance. Next slide, please. And since we are unable to enter school grounds because of the pandemic, we accompany the implementation remotely. Our teachers share photos documenting the experimental activities as they happen in their classrooms, the outcomes, and the students' feedback. Next slide, please. And COVID-19 has also stressed our need to invest more in content digitization. So in addition to making all of the activities available on our website, We are producing demo videos to complement them and to provide our teachers with even greater implementation autonomy. And despite all the difficulties that COVID-19 caused, the experience that we acquired and the coping mechanisms that we have developed are going to be invaluable to the planned expansion of the Lab in a Box project through lockdowns and travel restrictions. We feel like now we're equipped to provide expert remote hands-on training anywhere. And in fact, in just a few months in September, several groups of teachers in Angola and São Tomé e Príncipe will receive the Lab in a Box kits and will attend our training sessions. And next slide, please. So thank you very much for your attention, and please follow us and send us your comments.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo and Joanna. Again, another very interesting and very useful project, especially for teachers that sometimes like having the more resources to teach the children. So very, very good. So we will move to the fourth project of this SLAM session, Cientistas em Casa, that Renata Ramalho will be presenting. So Cientistas em Casa is a web series with hands-on scientific experiments for families and schools. And I would invite Renata to, we have Renata with, yeah, we have Renata.
Yes,
yeah.
we do. Just a moment. I'm just trying to share my screen.
We have,
see if I can, yeah, share it here. And have it on presentation mode. Yeah, you're probably seeing the wrong screen, right?
The right screen.
You're seeing the right screen, or
well,
do you see my notes? Do you see notes or no?
Yes, yes. At the moment we see notes. Yes.
Okay, so let me try to change that. Can you see it? No.
No. Should we try with us because we have your presentation?
Yes, maybe. Yeah, just. Okay, let me just see. Can you see it now? No, still not.
No.
Okay. So yeah, please. I'm sorry, but
yeah. Joanna, do you think we could share? And you should have control of the screen.
Yeah. Okay. No. Okay. Let me see if I can control the screen. No. Okay. Okay. So thank you for having us. So today I'll be talking about the web series Cientistas em Casa, which means scientists at home. So to give you some context, we are a scientific institution located in Oeiras, so in the Lisbon area. And the municipality runs a very comprehensive educational program known as Oeiras Educa, in which we are some of the key scientific partners. So these are some of the activities we used to do before lockdown, and they include, of course, well, visits to school and events, teacher training, receiving students, etc. But in March, I'm not able to change the slides. I'm sorry. Joanna, could you please change it to the next one? Yeah, thank you. So in March 2020, everything stopped. So our activities stopped suddenly as we went into lockdown in Portugal and mostly throughout the world. And so we felt that while kids were home, we really needed to have something they could do at home. So an educational, scientific content that they could do just anywhere. And so that's how Cientistas em Casa, Joanna, next slide, please. I'm not able to control it here. So Cientistas em Casa, that's how we came up with the idea of Cientistas em Casa. So this is a partnership between ETIC Ubinova, the Gulbenkian Institute of Science, and the Oeiras municipality. And next slide, please. And so this is essentially the idea behind it is the name of the series is you have scientists at home. So if scientists are home, you should be home too. And also you can be a scientist in your own home. So in ETIC Ubinova's version of Cientistas em Casa, in our series, what we have chose to do is we have scientists who are actually doing hands-on experiments that can be done with household chemicals and materials, because we really do not want people to go into the supermarket during the pandemic just to get materials. We actually suggest that some materials can be changed For instance, if you don't have food coloring, just use ink, and it will work just as well. Of course, we have the scientific accuracy given by the scientists themselves, but we also have additional scientific content that is provided by animation. So scientists don't have to explain every scientific concept. We will explain them through animation. We have found that an additional, just a moment more. No, it's the one before. It wasn't the, yeah, it's not a big deal. And so one of the big pluses we found was that the human factor. So you had scientists home with their kids or in their kitchens, and that humanizes scientists. You can really feel that they are people just like you, just like your parents. So anyone can be a scientist. Essentially, that's the idea we wanted to give. And it's aligned with school content. So teachers have been using it to complement what they're teaching, and kids can do hands-on experiments with very little. So next slide, please, Joanna. Of course, we found many challenges while doing it. The biggest of them as well, recording was doing by scientists or their families with their own equipment. So you had irregular light and sound and some trembling. Actually, we had one that was too stable, in which we actually added a little bit of trembling so that it looked more natural. And then we had to edit it out. And of course, we were working from home, so all the animations, the review, everything was doing through Zoom. Next, please. Yeah, so as for the next steps, we have continued to do episodes. So right now we have 8 episodes. Some of them are for special dates like Father's Day or live episodes we have been doing. And we plan on doing activities for schools, so toolkits that can be used by teachers. Next, please. So these are just to give you an idea of our views. Actually, we have found that teachers prefer to download the episodes and edit them so that they can show only the first part of the episodes and then have kids do the experiments themselves, and only afterwards they'll show the second part of the episode. So that's something that's also very fun to know. And actually the content has been shared in many educational websites. And so we have been kind of multiplying it and getting very good feedback. So next slide. So thank you. I hope you visit us in Cientistas em Casa. You see our playlist, and I'm available for any questions through the chat.
Right. Thank you very much, Renata. Very nice project once again. And it's so important to put scientists in people's houses so that it's not this really strange world as most of the times they are regarded by the general society. Thank you so much. And we are now moving on to the last project of this SLAM session, Soapbox Science Lisbon, that Marta Fidalgo will be presenting. So Soapbox Science brings science to the streets and highlights the work of women in science, technology, engineering, math, and science. And medicine. Marta, please. Let's see the slides.
Can you hear me like this in the presentation?
Yes. Yes, we can see the presentation, we can hear you.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Marta, and as Karina just said, I'm going to present the Soapbox Science Lisbon project. So I would like to start by asking you, what is a soapbox? And I bet that most of you think that it's a box for soaps, and it's true, but besides being a box for soaps, a soapbox is also a raised platform in which one stands in to give an impromptu speech. So people have been using soapboxes to give speeches in corner streets as improvised outdoor meetings. So during civil rights movements or other movements, when people want to make provocative speeches, soapboxes are a symbol for the speakers to be seen and heard and to use as a platform to give their speech to the general population. So in 2011, in the UK, Dr. Sirian Sumner and Dr. Natalie Taparelli took the symbolism of soapbox and allied it to the necessity.
Marta, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. There is some sound interference, so at least I'm not hearing you totally fine. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's only me or.
Okay, I don't know. Can you but you can see the slides and you can read more or less. No?
Yeah, you are slightly louder. Yeah, I think it's good. Okay.
Okay. Is it good now?
Yeah, it's louder, so I think it's more perceptible. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to speak a bit louder. So, as I was saying, soapboxes have this symbolism that are aligned with the civil rights movement. So speakers would use soapboxes on the street to pass their message to the general population. And in 2011, Dr. Sirian Sumner and Dr. Natalie Caparelli took the symbolism of soapbox and allied it to the necessity of bringing women scientists to the street, to empower women scientists, and also to open the discourse about the gender inequalities in STEM areas. So the mission of Soapbox is to bring science for the masses while promoting the visibility of women scientists, which will eventually challenge the perception of who a scientist is and will generate a network for female scientists for mutual empowerment. So the final goal is to open the discourse about gender inequality in science to the general public and to change these stereotypes that exist in the population about who a scientist is. Soapbox Science is now present in 14 countries and 44 cities, and since 2020, this includes Lisbon here in Portugal, when we did our first event in September of 2020, that due to the pandemic, it had to be a live stream event, which is not our usual type of event. So regarding the impact that we have in our speakers, we give them science communication training by using several workshops where we can give them science communication tips and feedback on their progress throughout the workshops. We also try to increase our speakers' visibility, either by giving them a place where they can talk about their work, but also because they benefited from the social media attention and the general Portuguese media attention that the event has received. And finally, we want to generate this networking, which is the biggest challenge right now because of COVID, because this is supposed to be future gatherings where we can discuss the issue further with the speakers and other people involved in the event. But for now, it has been through Zoom and it has been working, and we hope that it can continue to promote this discussion on the topic. Regarding our audience, last year we had 200 registrations in our event, and 12 of the 18 Portuguese districts were represented in the event. And this is, of course, a positive outcome of being in a pandemic. Besides being restricted to an only city or a street, we could reach most of the country. So at the end of the event, when we asked our audience what they thought about it, 70% said that they would recommend the event, and 96% said that we were very effective in promoting women scientists. Moreover, 100% of our audience said that it was a friendly and warm experience, which makes us very happy about our work. So currently, we are working on the Soapbox Science Lisbon 2021 event. We are a team of 8 people from different institutes and from different backgrounds here in Portugal. We also count with the help of our volunteers, without whom we could not do this, and of course of our collaborators here in Portugal that go from private organizations or associations to public universities and private universities also. We use our social media channels to promote and to increase the visibility of our event, but also to promote the discussion further in the general public, in the persons that are on the social media channels, by generating infographics with published data on the topic so people can get more informed about it. And also we use this to increase the visibility of our speakers even further so people can change the perception that they have about who a scientist is. Finally, I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation, and all of you for listening, and please save the date. Our 2021 event will occur on the 23rd of October, and you can pre-register using the QR code or the link that I will leave in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. A clear example of a project at scale, right? You are global and you have a huge impact all over the world. So that's very, very good. Thank you all for the presentations. It has been really, really interesting to know all these different projects and how you tackle the science education challenge, let's say, especially during a pandemic. So thank you all for being here today and for applying for this STEM session. We are now moving on to the last part of our symposium, and I will pass to Patrick, which is another co-organizer of the symposium, to move on with the roundtable.
Okay, thank you, Karina. So it's a pleasure to share the third part of this event, of this symposium, which has been very stimulating, very exciting, very interesting to follow. And I hope you following on Facebook or here on Zoom feel the same way too. So I'm very happy to chair the roundtable. And so what we've prepared for the roundtable, it's a more interactive component of the session. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly say who the colleagues are who will be participating in the roundtable. And then those colleagues will be answering 2 questions, which I'll share with you in the chat so that you know what we're asking them. And these questions are essentially just to set the scene, and it's an opportunity for our colleagues to reflect on the symposium and to look a bit ahead in the future, what they believe will be happening next in terms of science education. And then we've allocated time for questions from the audience. Okay, so Karina and I will be monitoring the chat, especially Karina, because I'll be moderating the roundtable. So please post your questions in the chat. Karina will monitor them, and then she will group them and will phrase them. Then we'll put them to the panelists. Okay, so please use the chat function for the Q&A. So let's kick off, as I mentioned, the roundtable first with very brief introductions, and then with the questions that we've prepared for 3 speakers. So the first is we have 3 distinguished colleagues that are participating. We're very, very glad to have them here. The first one is Louise Archer, Professor of Sociology of Education at the Institute of Education at UCL, and you've seen Louise's very interesting presentation earlier today. The second is João Costa. João Costa is the Portuguese Secretary of State for Education, and of course, some of you perhaps also know, he's also by trade a professor of linguistics at Nova University of Lisbon. He's a very renowned researcher in the area of linguistics. And he is also the former dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at Nova University. So João has both a background in policy making, and he's in the middle of, I mean, he's part of the government. He's been for several years now, guiding schools and practitioners through the pandemic as well. And then last but not least, we're very pleased to have Ana Noronha with us. Ana Noronha is the Executive Director of Ciência Viva. That's Portugal's National Agency for Scientific and Technological Culture. It's a very important institution in Portugal that was created in 1986 to promote science education, science literacy, scientific culture. Ciência Viva organizes many, many different activities, among which perhaps send out the Ciência Viva Science Centers that they have at 21 locations across Portugal. They also support and maintain over 200 science clubs at schools. So this is an institution that really is at the forefront of science education outside of schools. So in terms of roundtable, as I mentioned, we've prepared 2 questions for our colleagues, and I shall put them in the chat. Hold on. So these are the 2 questions. And so what we're going to do is each of of our 3 colleagues will answer these 2 questions very briefly, so in just 5 minutes. So the first question is, reflecting your professional experience over the past 12 months, what was the main challenge for science education, or we could even say for education more broadly? The second question is, bearing in mind today's talks and the SLAM presentations, which were very interesting, what innovative measures or activities have emerged over the past 12 months that could improve science education in the nearby future? So one question is looking back, right? So what was the main challenge? What have you seen popping up? And the second question is looking at the future. What are the main things, maybe 1 or 2 things that come up? So I would suggest we kick off with Louise, addressing both of these questions. Then after this, João Costa, and then after this, Ana Noronha. So we'll go in alphabetical order. So Louise, what do you think? Looking back.
So, thank you. So looking back, you'll be unsurprised that I think, as per my talk, I think the growing gap or debt is a really key issue. And associated that, sort of beyond that, I'd say the intent to challenge is for teachers and educators to actually be reflective practitioners. So we know all about, and we heard from the presentations, the challenges of remote learning. We also know funding has had a real impact on informal spaces in particular, but also on the amount, like in England, the amount of professional development that teachers can access and so on. So I think one of the key issues has been we've reduced those spaces of people being able, and resource for people being, educators, practitioners being able to stop and reflect. I think the focus on content catch up has been really, really challenging there. And I think the implication of that is we lose chances for meaningfully engaging young people with science. Looking forward, I don't want to be just constrained by what's gone before, because I think it's always nice to sort of think more expansively. So I'm most excited about interventions and ways of teaching science in which science is positioned as the vehicle for agency and communities and not the destination. So I think we've had too much of a focus on the science pipeline and not enough of understanding the real value of science for public scientific literacy and citizenship. So for us, I think the sorts of engagements that support that are really important and really interesting. We try to do some of this in our own work, as I referenced in the talk, providing actual frameworks and structures for teachers to shift that science teaching and learning through from what do I need them to know and learn about, through to why should these particular young people care about this? How does it relate to them and their lives, what matters to them? And to lens that teaching, to target it to the marginalised. We see where we see this sort of approach happening, we see that engagement, the shift in the classroom or the learning context and cultures to these more inclusive and participatory ways that really do support young people's agency, and where we see young people able to use their science to take action on issues that matter to them. That's really important. And I think just to fit in one last one, where funders change their views on what matters and how they measure the success or what they want from interventions, where we've seen funders learn and grow and not require a focus on absolute numbers of people who've participated or content that's been learned, but actually shift to valuing longer term, more focused interventions and ways of teaching science and engaging young people with science, where science is the vehicle, not the destination. That for me is the exciting part of looking forward.
Very, very, very interesting. I've taken a lot of notes, and I won't ask questions now. I think we'll keep them for the, but you raised very, very important issues. And I think João Costa might pick up on some of these as well. So, and here he is, yeah, João Costa. So, in fact, last time we've talked about, it was a year ago, actually. I think we were in the same office, the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember when I heard Luis's talk today, I remember exactly a year ago, more or less, we talked in a different meeting. And you outlined that the main, what you were struggling with and what you were really dealing with was the worry that you had about the rising inequality, that the pandemic might exactly cause that. And I know in Portugal, at least, if you followed, for those of you who have followed the lockdown discussions in Portugal, the Ministry of Education had an important role to play, actually, in whether or not there should be a lockdown or not, precisely because of the issues of inequality. So I look very much forward to hearing what João and what the Ministry of Education, what was your perspective here? So the first question was looking back, the main challenge, and looking forward, what do you head next?
Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's great to be able to be part of this panel, especially sharing it with Luis and with Anna Noronha, and for being able to discuss these topics. And I will try to be very brief in order to allow time for the open discussion, which I think is the most interesting part of it. And I would say that looking back, the same I mentioned 1 year ago remains true. That is, the pandemic brought a big rise on inequality in education. It's not only about, many times the focus was access to computer or good internet, but it's way more than that. It's about having a rich environment full of stimuli, with sometimes for some people, for some children, they are not surrounded by curious adults. And the role of school is really to teaches how to ask questions, how to be aware that the world is out there and that there's so many things to explore and so many questions that you can pose. Of course, the experimental nature of science was a big challenge. Students could not go to the school labs or could not be manipulating some materials. And I add here the dimensions of that involve the vocational education and training, in which there's a lot to be learned through. I'm sorry, I'm having here a conflict of sound. There's a lot in vocational training, that education and training, that happens in labs, that happens in the internships that students perform, and this was also very much affected. And on the good side, I'd say that finally many people opened their eyes for the inequity and the issues of inequity in education. They were already there. I often say that the pandemic just put the education systems around the world under a big microscope, and things that were already there became visible for everyone. The huge dependence on parents, or having parents at home that can provide a rich context for learning, the different conditions for accessing the curriculum and being successful in curriculum development. Everything was already there. So I really hope that we don't lose the focus of this visibility. And another good thing was that, as we saw here in the project presentations, there was so much creation by teachers, by institutions, by projects. It all of a sudden, and just need to mention some of the projects that were presented here. All of a sudden, it was possible to do science at home with very simple materials, with very accessible materials, and that part didn't die. Instead, it grew. And also, it was an opportunity for us to draw the attention to, especially in the area of sciences, to many resources that are available for free online for teaching science when you are not in school. And things like the videos that are produced in the Khan Academy or in our Ciencia Viva that makes available all these resources. That was really an important opportunity, and they will still be there after the pandemic. So there's no need to forget that all these resources exist when the pandemic is over, as we all hope. Then finally, looking forward, I think these 12 months give us an opportunity to have a deep reflection about the role of science in education. And we saw that we have as the big learning outcome of our education system in Portugal, what we call a student profile that identifies the main areas of competence to develop through the 12 years of compulsory schooling. And they include creativity, critical thinking, reasoning, problem solving, aesthetic and artistic sensitivity, scientific knowledge. And the best way to promote this is to promote several things that appear to be conflicting when we look at them for the first time. One is to understand that science is one of the most important tools, alongside with reading and today's book World Day, so I didn't want to skip this mention. It's a very powerful instrument for granting freedom. We, through our curiosity, through our capacity to evaluate how much given information that I read or someone tells me is grounded on evidence, the freer I am. That gives me freedom, because I'm not going to follow any big headline that doesn't have any scientific grounds. I am able to disentangle what is a fact and what is an opinion, and those are really powerful tools for freedom. The other thing, and I'm about to finish, is the way scientific knowledge is a tool for understanding. All of a sudden, we see it all around the world. We see negationism about the pandemic. We see loads of fake news about the pandemic and the vaccines and the virus. And at the same time, the whole population seemed to have turned into virologists, epidemiologists, because we have science being discussed in the media. But this is a bit bold for me to say, but the media haven't yet learned to communicate science. It's absolutely normal for anyone who studies science that there are side effects on the vaccination process, that the level of efficiency is not 100%, but many times these are presented as scandals, failure of science, creating discomfort, creating fear in general. And fear is the opposite side of science. Science is the key for us to be able to enter a dark room and turn on the lights, because all of a sudden we see what's in there. And this brings me to the last aspect I'd like to mention, is that we cannot do science by itself. That is to say, science has been used to do good things, wonderful things, but also to kill people. So science without humanities don't work. The same way the reverse is true. And when we think of science this way, we're also thinking of the crucial interdisciplinary nature of knowledge these days. The pandemic is a great topic to develop curriculum at school. It has a clear relation to what students are living. It calls for multidisciplinarity, because I cannot understand the pandemic if I don't understand biology and mathematics and ethics and concepts of freedom. There's so lot going on. The world here in Portugal, everyone is talking about the R, so all of a sudden it appears that we're all discussing mathematics. But another thing is to understand what an exponential growth is like, and that requires knowledge. And so we see this way the fundamental role of science for an active, because it is informed, citizenship, and also we can treasure this moment and look into the future as a great opportunity to value the role of fundamental science. There would be no vaccination, there would be no tests if there weren't curious people in the past that just did research about something that made them curious. And that's really, I think, the role of school. And that those are some lessons that I think can be learned. I talked way more than the 5 minutes, Patrick, you should have shut me off.
No, this very interesting comments and thoughts, and we'll get back to these after Anna's comments, and so then we'll have time for a broader discussion. I'm taking notes here as well. I'd just like to encourage everybody to please make use of the Q&A function to write questions, because we can then post these to our panelists. And so to conclude this first part of the roundtable, we have Ana Noronha from Ciência Viva, and I very much look forward to seeing how Ciência Viva, which plays, of course, a very important part, counterbalancing what is done in the schools. Of course, science education is not just in schools, it's outside of schools is very important as well, as all of you will agree. So Anna, looking back past 12 months, what was the main challenge that you faced, or the Ciência Viva faced? And then looking ahead, what innovative measures or activities have emerged that could improve science education in the nearby future?
Okay, thank you for your question. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here and to hear all these opinions and experiences, which are very enriching. I think that the main impact of one of the main challenges of the pandemic was the impact it had on socialization of us all, but particularly in schools, because for children, the schools, besides family, is the main site for socialization, for learning values, for learning citizenship. So this is an important aspect that is very difficult to replace in the online. Then, of course, we deal a lot with science education. For science education, it is impossible to replace a lab experiment by a video. Of course, we did videos, and we also had the Ciência Viva em Casa, which is an invitation for people to do science at home by doing science in their kitchens, and also even in the courtyards or in the verandas, see what are the insects that would come to your windows, or looking at the limestone of the buildings to see if there were fossils. So there is lots of science that can be done, practical work that can be done at home, but we all know it's not enough. So this is, and I love to see the science in a box experience, for example. It's a very nice experience, but after a certain level of complexity, or for certain topics of the curriculum, it is, of course, impossible to replace. So these were the main challenges, and this was how we tried to not overcome, but at least to get a solution for that. But there were also things that emerged and that I think were good and are going to stay. One of them is interactivity, because talks, classes, lectures have become much more interactive. Suddenly everybody was learning all these technologies of getting interactive things, making lectures more like pitches, or like we have seen here, slam. So all this changed the way we present in a much more interactive way. The other thing is enabling long distance connection, because now we can have meetings with teachers, and we have kept the network going because we had to contact them. So we have to keep the network by numerous meetings with teachers from north of Portugal to the Algarve all together, and this was much easier due to electronic communication. Otherwise, we would have to invite them to a certain place, typically at the center of the country, and they would have to travel, and all this would have been much more complicated. The other thing, so I think that these are trends that have come to stay. The other thing is also the possibility of inviting researchers into the classrooms and into our science centers that live far away. Namely, for example, Portuguese researchers who live abroad, like many of you. It is now much more easier to bring them to the classrooms. it is also possible to bring foreign researchers for schools that already know English for certain levels of knowledge. So all this, suddenly the world of possibilities of interaction opened a lot. And I guess this will be here to stay. There will be even possibilities of children to develop international projects more easily with young colleagues from other countries or living in other places. For example, even Portuguese immigrant communities who live in France or in Germany and who could now contact Portuguese colleagues. So there are lots of new possibilities that were opened up and that I think will have come to stay. We at the Pavilion of Knowledge started the program also of guided visits, enabling students, classes from different places of the country or of the world, because we are translating them to visit the science center. Of course, again, like practical science, this is not the same thing as being physically at the Pavilion of Knowledge, touching everything. But well, that's the best you can get. And it will stay because now we are open and classes continue to demand those services. So I think we can see this as an opportunity also for the future. And okay, I think I have already talked more than 5 minutes. About the interactivity in communication, we even sat down and created 10 commandments of digital communication that I can share with you afterwards, which are very funny.
Okay, thank you very much. So we now have time, I think, until 12:15, is it? Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes, a quarter of an hour for more interactive component. So please, since you cannot, since most of you in the audience cannot just unmute and speak, please post the questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And Karina is keeping an eye on it. Okay, Karina, do you want to? Okay,
yeah, we can start. Yeah, we'll give like by order so that everyone has the opportunity to get their questions answered. So one of the attendees, Anonymous, is asking like, what advice would you have for someone who has entered a public engagement role during the pandemic, so hasn't yet had experience of public engagement beyond the online world? I think it's a quite difficult
of public engagement beyond the online world. I mean, one of the things, this connects nicely perhaps to Joanna's questions as well. And a lot of you, of course, who are working, a lot of you who are present, of course, are active researchers or even scientists, so STEM scientists. And one of the things we see a lot working, for example, with native scientists, is often this dual role, right? So if you're working, doing science, on the one hand, you're paid to do science, right? To be in the lab, for example, or in the classroom or in the library or wherever you do your science. But of course, it's very important to engage with the public. And I think this connects nicely to several of the issues that came up here in these opening statements, the value of science for citizenship. And I think it's perhaps an opportune moment for us to realize the value. I mean, if you look the past year, if there's one thing we've always been paying attention to is what scientists are saying, right? Which I think is interesting because on the one hand, I felt it was wonderful. You know, there was a time in the UK that if you lived in the UK, you will remember the Brexit statement by Michael Gove that the public had enough of experts. And all of a sudden, experts turn out to be quite important after all, right? So people developing vaccines, for example, turn out to be doing quite valuable work. But at the same time, of course, if you don't have any background in science, you might be frustrated by the fact that science opinions change, that things are up for discussion, that's normal, that's part of good science, there being discussion. But anyways, perhaps this is an opportune moment to have more scientists to be involved in public debate and doing public engagement. So Louise or Anna or João, for example, do you have any general advice?
Well, I would say something, but maybe it's obvious, is that train with your family and friends. Because family and friends are the first circle you have to communicate and try to explain them what you do. I always had this problem. I'm a physicist, so it is not very easy sometimes to explain certain parts. And I would train either with colleagues from other areas or with my own family.
I think the issue is also not necessarily the medium. I don't think the medium is the main issue. There are certain practical things that are different online versus in person, but it's the key underlying principles that I think are more important. So you'd be unsurprised to know that my advice would be to really engage with those resources around equity to develop your own equitable practice. And I think relating it to the other question more widely about how scientists balance their time and energy, I would seriously suggest people should ask, why do I want to do this? If you're a scientist, why do you want to do public engagement work? And I think the answer is really important. And the balance of the answer, is it because you're just evangelical about science, or are you evangelical about social justice, or is there a meeting of the two? I think if it's the first one, I think there needs to be care, because not all public engagement work is good public engagement work in terms of engaging young people. We have examples from, and it's not that I'm against public engagement, but we have, you know, examples in our data of very well-meaning professionals. I often use an example of a Dr. Bridges, an engineer who goes into schools, and he completely reinforces stereotypes unwittingly because he's very focused on delivering in his case, the engineering content. And without that, I think it can not do the thing we want it to do. So I would say to both, I'd really recommend really sustained professional engagement. And I don't think there's enough of it out there for people who do public engagement. Even in the UK, I've talked to the STEM Ambassador scheme, and there is no required training to support them to engage or understand issues of inequality and inequity. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'd like to add that fully agreeing with Anne and Luis that there's an issue of time as well, timing, I'd say. Science requires time, and we live in a world in which communication with the public is pressured by these quick answers, these easy to swallow pills of information, and that calls for a big ethical compromise for scientists, because there's an issue of how we communicate. The language cannot be so hermetic that we only talk to ourselves, although you are on national TV, but then you're judged not by the validity of your arguments, but by how convincing you are, or how good looking you are, and all of a sudden you are not a scientist, you are a TV star. And it is also important. I mean, we know academics and researchers are very are people with high self-esteem many times. So these moments of communication can, if they are not well prepared and done, may kill the spirit of scientific knowledge and scientific research, which is the truth is always relative until the next finding. Time is key, and we see this with the pandemic. Everyone wants answers, absolute truths, and then science appears in some places to lose credibility because the others who give quick answers, spreading fake information and pseudoscience, communicate in simple terms. So there's a moment in which we have to find the right balance between a very effective communication, a very serious communication, saying at some times, this is not true, this is absurd, this does not make sense, and also not making our public engagement a competition of scientific stars. There is scientific consensus is not built on newspapers, it's built on academic journals. And so science communicators also have also to be within this ethical commitment. Otherwise, all of a sudden, science is turned into opinion and not into scientific method. And just to let Anna, it is, suppose you have to explain to your family that you are a linguist doing formal syntax with sub-features of words and things like that. That can be even worse.
Very, very interesting responses. I'm looking at the chat here, and several interesting issues have been pointed out.
If I can also comment
go
on
ahead.
that.
Go for it.
There is something very important regarding what Juan said, that scientists have, and which sometimes it's not easy to replicate. It's authenticity. It is very important to transmit the idea more even than the facts, the scientific facts. It is more important to transmit the nature of science, so that we don't see people frustrated because the vaccines have side effects or that it is not 100% efficient. We have to know that science has limits, that science is a never-ending story, and that is part of its own nature. And transmitting this idea is even more important than the facts, because the facts, they can go to a reasonable source in the internet and get them. But this authenticity can only be transmitted by scientists, although sometimes with glasses and with white caps, etc., but they have this authenticity.
But also, if I may add, Anna, with also promoting an understanding that public policies should be evidence-based, but not necessarily determined by science alone, because there's also a danger in that. And again, the pandemic is a good example. We all want to be safe, and we are all public health agents, but we cannot put everyone in a box and close them in the box until the virus goes away. So there's also this, we need the voices, we need the evidence, but and we need scientists in politics as well, but with this great, it's a bit like justice and government. They have to be independent, and scientists and governors also have to keep this level of independence. And not everyone achieves this so well.
I think there's also a really useful and valuable potential going forward to disrupt this notion of scientists a bit. I do think there's a big value of being able to democratize that a bit more. We do talk about the scientists or the engineers, and they're seen as very distant and quite elitist and as the experts. And some of the exciting interventions and partners we've been working with have really been trying to make it so that it focus on young people not just as consumers of science or as empty vessels to be filled up with science knowledge by the experts, but to being producers of science themselves. And I think when you get those more democratic shifts so that everyone sees themselves as a scientist, whether or not they're a professional scientist, that's when I think we'll see a wider participation in science and more young people using science for their agency. I'm not saying that scientists don't exist and don't have a value, but I think that notion of keeping it very special and bounded can work against the sorts of things I think everyone's arguing for, working towards.
Yeah, those are very, very good points. And I think several of you pointed to the value of science for citizenship, which I think it seems a very opportune moment to explore this right now, because at the moment, and as we're all glued to the television and to the phones of our smartphones, right, just reading up what the scientists are saying is, of course, you can make that extra point, and of course we can challenge the notion of what it means to be a scientist, as many of these beautiful initiatives have been doing. I want to focus just briefly. There are several issues. Looking at the chat, there are several issues that I think that came up. One of them was the issue of inequality. There's also the issue of technology moving forward, because of course technology was what allowed us to function relatively easily here, at least in Europe and in the West, because everybody has a smartphone, and well, not everybody, but we'll kick off. Perhaps Rodrigo has a question about inequality, and I think I'll just read this out, Rodrigo, if you don't mind. Increasing inequality in students has been pointed out as something that the pandemic is exposing clearly, which I think all of us agree, and the role of school context teachers to mitigate it. What immediate actions do you devise for tackling this problem, other than basic providing of laptops, better internet, etc.? So on the one hand, the pandemic, of course, has, as I think João was saying, it's like, the education system is under the spotlight. And so these inequalities really emerge, and they might be exacerbated at the same time because of the growing awareness of these inequalities. Is this the opportunity to address them? So what, in your opinion, what's the natural next step? And so looking, for example, Louise research, or João from a practitioner's perspective, or Anna from a João from a policymaker's perspective, and Anna from a practitioner's outreach practitioner. So perhaps Louise, you want to? I mean, I see you on the screen on the video. I see you very prominently.
Thanks. I think it's a really challenging issue, so it has to be addressed on multiple levels. So as the question points out, there are some, basic things around the digital divide there, but I think that it has to go hand in hand with professional development for teachers, more resource for those who need more resource, but also interventions like decolonising the curriculum. So I think we do, I think there's a really good value in decolonising the science curriculum. And I think if you put the pieces together of curriculum, of professional development and time and space for teachers, and with interventions for students as well, then it's a difficult problem, and it's going to need multiple fronts.
If I can build on that, we are now at the point of building and hearing lots of people, including students, about the measures and for the immediate future. And there are aspects that are really tough. One is actually the real meaning of learning losses. It's this one chapter in the curriculum that was not addressed, or is it some more high-level skills that need to be further supported, because they can be an obstacle for further progression in the future. We have 2 school years affected. 2 school years affected. That's a lot, and it's counterproductive to think that we are going to squeeze 3 school years in 1 year, because that would be another source of inequity by itself. Because the most advantaged students maybe would be able to follow, but those that already came with difficulties would not be able to follow, and be even more left behind. And there's an whole issue that is sometimes disregarded, but there's a big focus that I think should be put on this, which is everything that has to do with well-being and emotional and mental health, because this is very much affected right now. I mean, we all feel that we are fed up with the pandemic, that we want to go out, we want to hug people, and everywhere. Now, this on a child or a teenager can be even more harmful. And so we will have to be able in our education systems to find this nice balance between things. Looking at again at Anna, we have our Ciência Viva Pavilion of Knowledge, Pavilion Mariano Gago now, and it's a wonderful place where you have fun, you develop more curiosity and you learn lots of science. So we have to think of places and experience and toolkits and taking the kids out of the class and go in the park and see how much is there for us to be able to ask questions and find answers and to do research. And that requires tools and also adaptations in the practices. But really, I think what we're being called into is intentionality, and also the hiatus that sometimes exists between scientists and elementary and secondary education needs to be diminished. Let me give you an example with a program we started 2 years ago here. It's called scientifically provable, but the word in Portuguese is the same as probably, and provable. And it was a call we made for partnerships between school libraries and research units at universities. And so what we ask for is very simple, that scientists go to schools, that students visit the labs and the universities of scientists, and that they talk freely about these topics. And we thought the school library was the right place to promote this, because that's the headquarters of knowledge and open knowledge in a school. We had in 1 year around 300 partnerships, which was very, very exciting, and we have many good things happening. And I heard the report of some scientists every now and then, and some of them teach at university, and they said, by talking to the kids, I realized how I could improve my teaching strategies, because the questions some of them have when they are 8 years old are the same that my 19-year-olds have. And so this is one example of good practice that I think can also be a tool to reduce inequities. Otherwise, we're always dependent from what happens at work, at home, and that's not fair.
Inequities, if I may, I think that an important thing to reduce inequities is hands-on, and precisely those study visits outside, etc., making bridges between what they learn at school and the concrete things and the hands-on, the daily experience. This is very important to include those children that have poorer contexts at home, so they can build things with their hands, and like this, learning what they are absorbing, what they are having at school. This is very important.
So, Joanna, do you think we have time for one more question?
If it's a short question,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, my question will be short. The answers might be long, but I've seen one of the, thank you so much for posting the questions. And I think I can, there are several strands going on at the moment. One is talking about the role of the humanities and social sciences. There are other discussions about misinformation, for example, and the role of technology. And I think we can combine the two, these different strands into the following question. So Rita Neves has posted a question which I think connects very, very nicely several strands. It connects the issue of misinformation and also adds the issue of the value of other disciplines, humanities, social sciences. Rosalia Vargas may also pointed this out. Instead of talk about STEM, perhaps we should talk about STEAM or STEAMed to include the arts and design, for example. And so maybe this is something that might be a good last question to conclude the roundtable. Also bearing in mind what João Costa said earlier as well, right? So you have all these scientific models, the scientific predictions and so forth, but ultimately the decisions are based on other things, right? On ethical dimensions, philosophical reflection on justice issues and whatnot. It's not just scientific scientific models. And that's something, of course, if you have a training in science, it's exactly, no scientist would say, well, based on this, you have to shut down, right? So you have multiple models, and the politicians decide. It's not the scientists who decide, despite the fact that politicians often like to pretend that the scientists are behind the lockdowns and whatnot. Anyway, so I'm going to read out Rita's question, which brings in the issue of misinformation, but the issue also of the value of humanities and social sciences. So Rita posted a question: during the pandemic, young kids understood what was happening, the virus, the needed measures, lockdown, etc. However, we assist teenagers. Teenagers were facing the problem of disinformation and maybe questioning the measures, either questioning or don't understanding the science behind this. So bearing this in mind, what's the value of multidisciplinarity? I mean, could a strong background, not just in science, but also in other disciplines such as philosophy or Portuguese or the native language, or English, for example, other sociology, other disciplines. So bearing in mind this issue of misinformation, and what is the value then that humanities and social sciences play? And Rita posted this, she mentioned this is primarily for the Secretary of State, João Costa, and in a way it's a good place to start, because João, of course, was also the Dean of the Faculty of Social Science Humanities, so I know those disciplines are at his heart as well. And João, would you like to kick off? So what is the value of these other disciplines?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I tell any scientist that you cannot live without humanities and social science, but
do they listen? Do the scientists listen to you?
let me go straight to the point. I'm going to say common things that are also old news by now. We are experiencing a very quick transition in our relation with knowledge. We live surrounded by avalanches of information. Knowledge becomes disposable because we have some curiosity. We ask our phone, and we may forget because it will be there again. But the critical role of school has always been a bit like that, because fake news are not new. There's always been fake news ever since, I guess, maybe prehistory. Some tribe would say, "Go hunt that way because I see animals there," just because they wanted to keep the other way. That's fake news. But the thing is, there's an issue of credibility. The role of school, I would say, is to transform information into knowledge, and that's a step that requires expertise and practice. And I always say, many people use this argument, oh, now everything is available on the internet, so school should be, and teachers someday will be dispensed with. And I say no, I always say no, teachers have been more important than ever, because they are, for many students, the sole source of credibility and validity and validation for what they have just read or heard. And this also puts the burden on systems for promoting the scientific development of teachers. Now, based on that, dealing with misinformation is about being able to read. Let me bring in the linguist into this, although I said that we should keep things separate. But there are marks in texts, linguistic markers, that allow you to know whether something is an opinion or a scientific text. Some adverbs, if in the middle of a text I read, unfortunately, the results show, there's no fortune in science. And these are things that can be learned. Promoting extensive reading. So we see that PISA has results on this, showing that in many places students only start answering an item before reading the whole item. and this has a correlate on social media. It's reading the title without reading what's behind the title. So this is where language comes in. But a lot of misinformation is about, as many of us mentioned, about ethics, about being able to question, being able to criticize, being able to confront, being able to debate. And school cannot be a place of silence for the students, in which they are quietly listening. They have to. There's no scientific debate without questioning each other, and so promoting scientific literacy is also promoting the debate on topics, on facts, on how we read facts, and then to understand that there are different levels of literacy that are very, very important right now. We've all seen graphs that have been manipulated so that the scale shows a big rise or a small rise on the basis of, if I have a scale that reduces to very small levels, very small intervals, a big rise appears like a huge thing. And this is also something that we learn, and we learn in school. I'd like to emphasize this. This is learned in school. Our family environment can be very rich, but most of the time, dinner time is not the time for us to discuss scales in graphs or impacts of this and that on the economy. We don't do this with our 6-year-old children. We are not discussing world economics at dinner sometimes. So school is the place for this, and that's. But for that, there has to be the intention and the willingness to promote this. And for say in Portugal, we included citizenship as a compulsory area in the curriculum, because that's where issues like sustainability, human rights, environment education, sexual education, media literacy are developed. And this is not done in spite of the rest of the curriculum. This is done with the rest of the curriculum. That is to say, I cannot have, for instance, sexual education without knowing anything about science. And so I think this kind of answers the question.
Thank you. So if I think we're pretty much running out of time. So unless Anna or Louise would chip in briefly, but if not, then I would say we conclude the roundtable a little bit behind time. And I would like to use the opportunity first to thank again Louise, João, and Anna for very, very stimulating roundtable, and to all of you in the audience, and for the very interesting questions that you submitted. I'm aware that there are lots of other things we could discuss, and we could really spend 2 hours here really talking, and ideally we'd all sit around at dinner and have plenty of time for discussion. I hope that that comes back soon. The technology is wonderful. It allows us to organize events like this, but I think a lot of us face the human contact and the face-to-face, and I'm confident this will come back, thanks to science as well. Okay, so thanks everybody. I'll pass the word back to Joanna to conclude the symposium.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not going to be long. I want to first say thank you to all the organizers of the event, all the speakers, the excellent speakers, and of course, all the attendees for being with us and for being interested in this topic and actually wanting to make a difference, because it's together with the effort of everyone, we can move forward. My key take-home messages are that we started by realizing that actually school, the performance of a child in school, it's not dependent solely on the teaching or on the school environment. It actually depends on a lot of things that are out of the control of the school. So like the field matters, the context of the children matters, the exposure of and the environment that we have at home matters. And one good thing, let's say, good thing that the pandemic brought us was the realization that actually these matters a lot. And we can now put more attention to the resources that people have at home and the environments that people have at home, and chip these in when we're trying to design solutions or to provide the STEM education for those people. The other thing is to promote playful learning and to provide experiences. Maybe it does not work just to give content and more content. We actually need more elaborated experiences that people can have, so that they extract meaning of it, and they co-produce the learnings and the lessons and the things to take home. So like co-production, collaborative learning, playful learning are very important. And finally, that we should not forget the humans inside our professional selves, right? Before scientists, we are all humans. So if we want to tackle inequalities and promote meaningful learning experiences, we need to be connected with ourselves, ask why we want to do this, why it is really important to promote science education. And more than giving the knowledge, it's about giving the method, like trying to inspire people to know more about the scientific method and the way of thinking that a scientist usually has, which involves questioning and curiosity. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. If the panelists want to stay for 10 minutes longer, that would be great. And we'll say goodbye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
I'll stop the live stream.
Thank you. Bye.
And if the attendees want to leave, that would be great. Thank you very much for all the engaging discussions that were happening in the chat as speakers were speaking. Okay. Just bear with me one more minute, please. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thanks. Everyone has left now. Cool. I just wanted to say goodbye and hear from you any take-home message that you personally have made during this session. It would be great if you could share it with us.
I think for me, one of the things that struck me was a degree of agreement across the keynote speakers. I had the advantage of coming towards the end, so I was able to pick up on messages that were being shared by Louise and the other presenters. And I just thought it was really interesting, that notion that, you know, when we talk about the future of something, the reality is there is no future, there is only now. Now is what we have, and in the future it will be now again. So we need to focus our efforts right now on how we can improve things. I was really struck by the notion, I think Louise commenced with that idea that, you know, trying to change children or young people is the wrong way to go about bringing about improvement and greater equity. And from the perspective of an education policymaker, we're terribly concerned about achievement. You know, actually achievement and progression and development and the removal of inequity will only happen if we truly do address the systems we are creating and the way those hang together. And Elena spoke about the notions of the community of learners, and that community, of course, isn't only the community in the school, but it's actually that wider system. In the Education 2030, we call it the ecosystemic approach, the notion that education doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the openness of young people to pursue their interest, their natural interest in questions around science, about what is real, about what can be trusted in the world, can only be supported if we work together as an enabling community to help them explore those questions and not come to the education piece thinking that we already know all the answers. João Costa spoke about, you know, that notion of probable in the translation, rather than being certain, that actually a lot of knowledge is something that emerges as we work together. So I was really struck by, we all came from different perspectives, that actually was an enormous amount of confluence in our thinking. And it would be wonderful to be able to pull that out into something coherent.
Well, thanks, Suzanne, for sharing. That made me want to ask Eleni, because you've been researching about online education or education for your research life. How do you see all this sudden peak of interest in your field of research? How have you lived this? And what do you take from events like these? Like, we are a little bit coming from outside of your field, and now there is this sudden interest in your field. How do you see it?
I think from one hand, and that applies to everybody, not just students, right? So it applies to everybody. I think that online is here to stay for all of us, you know, purchasing things online and running our different services and needs online as well. So I think that it has brought us more closer to what we call information society as well, and the skills for, you know, we're talking about fourth industrial revolution and skills that the citizens will need today and for the near future. And I think that's an important takeaway message. We're more comfortable with these technologies now, I think. But at the same time, from my end, I'm a little bit concerned as well, because we've fallen into a pattern where we think that the panic response might be the norm, or the accepted, or the you know, of sufficient quality, and it's not. I think that we're seeing a lot of practices that are that were there because we couldn't do otherwise, and we needed to survive in this pandemic. But we need to, you know, be reflective. That's what I said. I think that's a very important thing for adults, teachers, and students. We need to look at it more critically and see what we need to change in order for it not to remain the status quo, but in order for us to improve on that and then connect that to our everyday life when we go back to our physical reality as well. So I think physical and virtual are here to stay, but we need to take a step back and reflect on how we can make that work for our benefit instead for against us. Because, and I'll just conclude here, because it may be, you know, a lot of teachers, for example, have gone into the classroom trying to do things just to be able to deliver their classes. But a lot of times they just do the passive, you know, frontal instruction that they would do in the class, or they don't have the resources to do otherwise. And that may actually create negative ideas about what online education and learning could be.
Good point. Redilson?
Hi again. I would like first to Thank you. Thank you, the organizer, for accepting me for this symposium. It was very nice and interesting and informative to hear from all of you and all the people here in the Q&A session also. And as Suzanne was saying, there is this agreement that we have an underlying problem that came to light with this pandemic. It was one good thing that the pandemic brought, to show that we had this gap between the students and between the schools, basically, and that now it's exposed and we can start to address it. To me, it's even greater because the country I come from, and in the beginning, when I started doing this, making these animations, it were just for fun, because I wanted to try and explain science. But then I found that we have this bigger problem, not only because we don't have any program that aims at teaching children science in a way that's more easy to learn or more relatable. One of the problem that we have in my, by the way, my country is Cape Verde, and the project Lab in a Box has a cooperation with schools, school there, and it's very good because during the high school, I never went to a lab. Well, I went, but just to see the lab. We didn't do any experiments, so it was only when I came to college that I could do that. But to get back to the point, the fact that I'm doing this animation now, and I see that's something that is very important, but it's still very limited, because contrary to what Eleni was saying, that we are in the fourth revolution. In my country, we are still struggling with the second revolution, and to have this kind of content to reach children is very difficult. And that's one of the main reasons why I chose to use PowerPoint, because I know that at least we have access to PowerPoint there in my country. It's more widely available. And compared to other animation softwares you can find out here, like After Effects, you have to pay. And that's pretty expensive. And also it requires a lot of computer capacity and all of that. Anyways, to resume, I'm kind of glad that we are all in the same boat, because this is a problem that's not only in my country, especially the gap between the students. So you have wild students going for one course and the others going for a different course. And I hope to learn more from you so that I can take this back home and tackle the problem. So once again, thank you.
Thanks to you. Thanks for sharing. That's it. I don't know if anyone else has any more comments. I just, if everyone is happy and no more comments, I think we can go and have lunch, probably. Go for a pee.
I just wanted to thank you and to say it was great to see all the projects that are ongoing all over, and actually that, yeah, we all agree a lot more than with think. And yeah, thank you, and I hope you do this again so that we can keep up with everything that's going on.
Okay, cool, thanks. We will try to share some of the insights through blog posts or something like that, so that other people can also take their time and in their reflective time and me time read about these and really think deep about these issues. And yes, thank you very much. And I do believe that together and sharing knowledge is important to move forward. So stay well and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.